Anti-poverty and pro-growth. That's how the First Minister, Humza Yousaf, has described his programme for government. It focuses on tackling child poverty and climate change. Key announcements, including the expansion of free school meals for school children in P6 and P7, increasing the Scottish Child Payment Benefit and the ban of single-use vapes. Well, let's speak to the First Minister now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
This was your first programme for government, a chance to lay out your vision for Scotland and a chance to reset after a difficult start to your time in office. It was obviously a very deeply personal statement, but I wonder, what exactly would you say is new in it?
Well, the very first announcement I made was scrapping the income thresholds for what's called a Best Start Food programme. So for the 20,000 mothers and their babies that will now be eligible to get nutritious food and milk, they will feel that that's new. For the many thousands of families with a 2-year-old that will now be able to get childcare, or indeed in our early adopted areas from 9 months old right the way through to the end of primary school, for those that will be able to access school-age childcare, that will be new to them. For the businesses that will be able to, for the onshore wind farms and businesses who are involved in onshore wind, having the consenting process for them to be able to power Scotland and to create jobs, this will feel new. For the entrepreneurs that will benefit from our £15 million entrepreneurship package, create jobs, create wealth, pay taxes, that will definitely feel new. So there's lots in here.
Let's look at some of the details on some of these then. In terms of tackling child poverty, an increase of investment of £400 million in the Scottish Child Payment. When will parents see an increase in their payments?
So they have, of course. If you remember, the initial ask from anti-poverty groups was to bring in a £5 a week per child per week payment. We've increased that fivefold, and that's why, of course, estimates are that we will this year
That's an existing policy that has already been increased. So when will they see the next increase?
90,000 children out of poverty here in Scotland. So we'll continue to work with anti-poverty campaigners, but the action that we are taking, this government is taking on tackling poverty, means that we haven't seen poverty rise in Scotland in the face of a hard Brexit, in the face of over a decade of austerity, in the face of the worst cost of living crisis in a generation, where in other parts of the UK, poverty is rising. So we'll continue to work with anti-poverty organisations. But exactly the measures I announced yesterday.
They've described this announcement of investment in the Scottish Child Payment as welcome, but they've also described it as disappointing. You said there that you've seen increases already in payments, but when will parents see the next increase in payment?
So again, we will have discussions in around the budget about what further measures we need to take to tackle poverty. It is understandable that lobby groups, anti-poverty groups, will want to push the government to go further. They have every right to do that. And in fact, it is through their efforts that we have seen the Scottish Child Payment increase over the years and increase substantially. It's a game-changing payment that's only available here in Scotland. And it's exactly the reason that, plus our progressive taxation, plus our social security system, that means that 90,000 fewer children will be in absolute relative poverty here in Scotland, and it's why our poverty rates in Scotland.
But still not on target to reach your poverty targets. You've pushed back the expansion of free school meals for P6s and P7s. Why was that?
Well, we haven't, but I'll come to that point in a second, because you're, of course, are asking that question around tackling poverty to devolve government. We have restrictions in our budget. We have a Westminster government that we're having to deal with the consequences of austerity, of a disastrous mini budget, of high inflation that affects our budget, and of course a hard Brexit, which has been catastrophic. In terms of your question around P6 and P7 free school meals, we haven't rolled back. That's incorrect to say so. Our manifesto commitment that I stood on.
It's not going to be fully in place until 2026. It was supposed to be implemented in 2022.
No, if you remember the manifesto we stood on, that is not what we committed to. We committed to introducing P6 and P7 universal free school meals by the end of the parliamentary term. But what I have said is that the next phase of that expansion will be for children that are in receipt of Scottish Child Payment, and that will begin next year as we continue that expansion. And we have an excellent offer, one of the most generous, if not the most generous offer around free school meal provision in the UK. And of course, this is a pledge that Keir Starmer just rolled back on, just dumped for school children in England, but we're continuing to maintain free school meals for children here in Scotland.
In terms of expansion of childcare for younger children, this was announced by your predecessor in April 2021. You've said that you're going to pay those working in childcare at £12 an hour. Why not implement those pay increases now to allow improve recruitment now?
So I will come to that. What I wanted to mention was the expansion that I mentioned was not just to 2-year-olds, which is important. That'll be the next stage of the national offer that we're rolling out. But also made the point that in 6 early adopter local authorities will also provide childcare flexibly to children that are 9 months old right the way through to the end of primary school. And that's school-age childcare targeted towards particularly low-income households and getting, again, disproportionately women back into the workforce.
We've already heard this week.
Helpful.
We've already heard this week from private nursery providers who say they're having to close rooms because they can't recruit staff. They're not getting enough funding as it is.
And that's why I also introduced and announced £12 an hour in terms of a wage increase for child care workers. The reason why
what does it do to help them now, though?
As you're rightly asking, well, we'll work with the sector to continue to support the sector as best we possibly can. That's why, of course, the expansion of childcare will be phased. The reason we can't bring it in immediately is, of course, because of those budgetary pressures, because of the disastrous mini budget of the UK government, sky-high inflation, having incredible, significant effects on our budget this financial year. And of course, the Deputy First Minister, the Finance Secretary, has given full detail of the pressures our budget is currently facing. So we have to weather the storm that's been created by the UK government, but we will raise childcare workers' wages to £12 an hour.
Also raising wages for those working in social care to £12 an hour. The Wellbeing Economy Secretary Neil Gray has told our colleagues on the 9 that very difficult decisions are going to need to be taken to ensure that we can provide that uplift to social care staff. Where are you going to get the money from?
So again, we will give full detail in the budget, and it will require some decisions to be made about where we spend, how we spend. And that's why Scotland, for example, has a progressive tax system where we ask those who earn the most, like politicians, first ministers, to pay more in order to get the services that we provide. So we will continue.
But just in terms of social care, are you going to cut
within the budget?
Are you going to cut budgets elsewhere within the health and social care system in order to fund these pay rises?
Well, we've not been cutting the budget for health and social care. If anything, we've increased. In fact, we have £1 billion extra this financial year to spend on health and social care. So, health and social care will continue to be of the utmost priority given the shock it has faced in terms of the global pandemic. So nobody is talking about cutting the budget of health and social care.
But in terms of how you pay the extra wages.
Yes,
where do you manage that? Do you cut services to pay for that, or how do you pay for those wages?
That's all factored in terms of our medium-term forecast. But we will get into details of the budget at budget time, and there will be a number of asks from anti-poverty campaigners, from education specialists, from those who are wanting to see infrastructure improvements in terms of transport, and we will have to take decisions on what we're able to do in the budget, in the confines of a fixed budget and in the confines of a Westminster settlement that has seen our budget being cut over the years.
So are you still planning an extra tax band for higher earners then?
So the Deputy First Minister, the Finance Secretary, has a tax advisory group made up of a number of tax experts who are sitting around that table. We will, of course, consider progressive taxation. I do believe and firmly believe that those who earn the most should pay the most, but there's no decision that's been made on tax. We'd also have to consider what the UK government does. If the UK government cuts tax, for example, we'll have to be mindful of the divergence that exists, and that divergence is fine absolutely to a point, but we have to be careful around the behavioural impacts of any divergence.
So if the UK government cuts taxes, you wouldn't raise further taxes here?
I've not made a decision, nor am I going to make a decision on GMS this morning around what we'll do.
Well, I would have expected you to make it before you came on the radio, to be fair.
No, you make tax decisions during the budget, Laura. That's been the position throughout evolution. I would expect, somebody
But you're making these promises. You would think you would know how to
knowledge
fund them.
to know that. So, yes, and we'll do that through the budget. It will take difficult decisions, difficult choices. We can't do everything that everybody wants all of the time. That is challenging. That is difficult. That is a reality of government. So we have to make difficult decisions. Sometimes that's around how we phase things in, for example. And that's why I'm not able to provide, as you asked me earlier on, that's why we're not able to provide an uplift to social care workers of £12 an hour right now, because that's a difficult choice. If I had the money, I would do it right now, but we have to wait until the next financial year to be able to do that.
One of the points that you made yesterday many times, that you were in favour of growth in order to tackle poverty. There wasn't much in this programme for government for business. No mention of the oil and gas sector, given that the revenues needed from that sector are going to be required to fund your push on renewables.
So a few things. First of all, the oil and gas sector is, of course, important to us. It's why I engage with the oil and gas sector. In fact, I'm going to be meeting with them later on this week. So we'll continue to engage where we can with the oil and gas sector. But there was things in the programme for government for
What do you
business.
tell them this week then? What do you tell the oil and gas sector this week
that will actually perhaps help the next one? Well, if I come to your first question at the moment, which is, there was plenty in the programme for government for business, from a £50 million entrepreneurial package to halving onshore wind, consents where we can, and also continuing with our new deal for business, which we have signed with businesses within the first 100 days, which will look at where else we can support small businesses, in particular in terms of the oil and gas industry, which is hugely important to us. Of course, we continue to support them with a just transition. I think everybody, including our oil and gas companies, realise that unlimited oil and gas extraction is not where Scotland's future is, but they continue to play a really important role. So how do we help continue to invest in that transition? That's why the Scottish Government
has put up £500 million.
Well, you put up significant amounts of money, like £500 million in a just transition fund, as we have done, so that we can begin to transition oil and gas workers from working in oil and gas to working in renewables, because that's where Scotland's future is. And it's not only Scotland's future, it's where the planet's future is, given
First Minister,
the climate catastrophe.
There's a report, there's a bit of a delay on the line. There's a report out today from Offshore Energy UK which says the sector requires £100 billion of investment from the private sector to help fund renewables and carbon capture storage. So I suppose you could help the oil and gas sector by telling them what your position is on new licences. What about Rosebank?
So my position hasn't changed on Rosebank. I've said it, in fact, I think I've said it on Good Morning Scotland before, that I'm not convinced, and I would need to be convinced about Rosebank having to go ahead. I would need to be convinced of any new oil and gas licences going ahead. And I think that is the right place to begin, and then take an evidence-based approach, which looks primarily at three things. First of all, and first and foremost, are climate obligations. But secondly, workers, and ensuring that no worker is left in the scrap heap. That's not going to help anybody. That's not going to be a just transition if we do that. And thirdly, energy security, which is not just a domestic matter, but a global matter. So we have to look at each of these factors before decisions are made. And of course, the decisions of these licences are not made by the Scottish Government, but made by a UK government.
Another factor on which many of our renewable technologies will rely upon is transport networks. You said you wanted to be crystal clear that this government will dual the A9. Can you be crystal clear on telling us when that will be done by?
So we'll update the Parliament in terms of timescales later this year. That's what we committed to do previously. So we'll come back to the Parliament and give full detail of when we'd expect that dualling to finish. And I understand the disappointment around some of the delays in relation to the dualling of the A9, but we have spent over £400 million dualling the A9 from Inverness to Perth already, and I confirmed yesterday the latest section, the Tomatin to Moy section, getting approval. So we'll come back to the Parliament, but there should be no dubiety or no doubt about the fact that we are absolutely committed to dualling the A9.
You say this government is committed to dualling the A9, so that's your government. That would assume that you're still in power then up until at least 2026. It can't be done by then, can it?
No, it won't be done by 2026. We've already made that clear that the original timetable around the dualling won't be met, and that's regrettable, understandable, some of the frustration around that. But we have promised to come back to Parliament later this year to give an update on the timetable.
The latest Electoral Commission report showed the SNP has a deficit of £800,000. Is the party solvent at the moment?
Yes, it is. That's I think you're referring to last year's accounts, and it's hardly a surprise that in an election year, political parties end up in deficit. You spend money to try to win elections, and so therefore, it's, as I say, not particularly surprising. I think it's been well rehearsed, the circumstances within which I came to the party and some of the challenges that the party faced. There's no doubting that. Many people didn't think we'd meet the auditing deadlines that we have met. I'm pleased we met them. And the party's finances are on a steady footing. We rely heavily on our 75,000 or almost 75,000 members that we have within the party. The biggest mass membership political organisation in Scotland that we are. We rely on that membership as opposed to relying on corporate donors. So we're on a steady financial footing, but we'll make sure, and I certainly will make sure, that the party continues to be the best campaigning machine in the entire country.
You are going into a campaign in Rutherglen and Hamilton West. How would you say internal party discipline is as you head into that election? Do we have any decision yet on what's going to happen with your colleague Fergus Ewing?
I'm not going to talk about internal party discipline matters. That's going to be decided, of course, by the group. You have a party of our size and scale that has the most councillors in the country, the most MPs in the country, and the most MSPs in the country.
Well, he voted against the government, so that was fairly public. Perhaps you could tell us what happens to him.
As politicians, we're pretty opinionated, so there can be differences of opinion. I have a pretty high tolerance for that. But of course, when it comes to issues of discipline, they're a matter for the internal group. It wouldn't be right for me to be discussing them in public. So the group will make any decisions around internal party discipline that they feel necessary.
And just finally, for the moment, just on a subject that is very high up the agenda at the moment, on aerated concrete. It could prove very costly for the government. Shirley-Anne Somerville said no new money was being made available by the UK government to fix the problems there. Do you have a contingency budget for it?
We don't have contingencies within the government to spend on RAC, but we will, of course, spend what we need to spend in order to ensure that our buildings are safe for those that use them. And we'll work with local authorities, whether it's schools or health boards, whether it's hospitals and health centres. What I am committed to doing is ensuring that there is transparency around this, and my intention would be by the end of this week to publish and work with those who have the information to ensure that information is publicly available around the schools that have been affected, and where we can give more information around the mitigations that have been taken. I think that's important for us to do, to ensure that there's a good level of public confidence around the action that's taken.
First Minister, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning.